So can you tell me your name, age, and place of birth?
My name is Alan Gustafson. My date of birth was 12/22 of 1944 in Warren, Minnesota.
Okay, so I'm just gonna ask you a few basic questions about your childhood. And the
Okay.
first one is, how was your life different as a child than for a child today?
Well, I grew up in a small rural community in northern Minnesota. Actually, I was born in 44 before there was any TV and any communications all over the world. And we played outside all the time and went to school every day. And we had to basically, when we were old enough, we all got a job and went to work. Different than I think most kids nowadays. They play on their computers. They don't play outside much. And the communications now, when you do something in Stephen, Minnesota nowadays, and something happens in California, you know about it immediately. Whereas when I was a kid, if I was in Stephen, Minnesota, and something happened in California, I might not know about it for a week or 2 weeks sometimes. Because there was really no TV when I was growing up till later, until like my high school years. So just the biggest difference is communications, or the way communications are handled, I think.
How has the role of family changed?
The role of families changed back when I grew up. Of course, my mom worked, but most moms did not work. They were stay-at-home moms. And that's the biggest thing. The family ate usually every night together. They didn't go out to eat every night. A lot of, up where I grew up, a lot of them was rural families on small farms. They farmed their own acreage, raised their food, and made a living that way.
So you grew up on a farm?
No, I grew up in town, in a small town, where my folks were in a restaurant and owned a restaurant.
Did you know anybody that grew up on a farm?
Oh yeah, your grandma did.
Do you know what a typical day like was for her?
I guess the best thing to say for like her brother John or Jerry, when they grew up, as soon as they were old enough, they would go to school, of course, but then they had to come home and maybe milk cows or do work on the farm. And that was true of kids that I grew up with in Stephen, my hometown. Any of the rural farm kids, when they got out of school, they rode the bus home and went to work. And most of the kids couldn't play football or anything because during harvest they had to go home and go to work.
So how was it different for you living in a town?
Different in town. I didn't have to rush home to milk cows or anything, but I did have to go home and help in a restaurant. And I would get up in the morning. I always had a job. I went to work in a creamery at 16 years old at 4:30 in the morning. When I got done from there, I went to the restaurant, helped mom for a little bit, and then went to school.
So how old were you when you very first started working?
I want to say 16, 15 maybe. Actually, a paying job was 16, I think.
Ooh. So, prices have changed a lot since then. So
yes, I'll give you an example. When I graduated from high school in 1962, I went to work at the Robertson Lumber Yard, and I made $1.25 an hour.
Ooh, that's a big difference. So, do you know what was minimum?
Big difference, but I also I bought a car that year for my aunt and uncle. It was a 1955 Buick, and I paid $300 for it. So, and it was only like 7 years old at that time. So the price, I remember when your grandpa, my dad, bought a 1959 Chevy, and it was $1,890. And in 1967, I believe it was, Grandma, your mom or your grandma, bought a 1967 Plymouth Barracuda for like $2,700. So the prices have changed greatly. In Grandma's restaurant, Grandma and Grandpa's restaurant, you could go in and buy 2 eggs, toast, and coffee, and it was 25 cents. And they could sit and get as many refills as they wanted. So, and Grandma used to have a buffet on Sundays where she'd do all her own cooking, and she would do chicken, ham, and turkey, potatoes, homemade pies, and everything. It was $1.25 for all you could eat. So yes, prices have changed.
All right. Well, you pretty much summed that up pretty good. So, what do you have any? Did you have any role models when you were younger, when you were a kid? Anybody that you looked up to or saw in the newspaper?
I guess maybe Mickey Mantle. Willie Mays was my favorite baseball player as far as sports. We didn't have hockey in my hometown, but as far as sports celebrities, that would have to be the one that either Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays.
Did you ever play sports?
I played sports. Yes, I played baseball, played football, played basketball, played golf, and I was in track. I wasn't very good at any of them, but I did go on to play a little bit of golf. That was my favorite.
What is the earliest historical event or significance you can remember?
The biggest one or the earliest one?
The earliest one.
Oh my gosh. I guess vaguely I can remember in 1948, I was 4 years old, and Grandpa and Grandma had a garage in Strathcona, Minnesota, and we lived like maybe half a block behind it. There was no buildings, and I remember it caught fire. And I can remember my mom running out of the house towards that fire. But that would be the earliest I could remember something that was really significant in my life, yes.
All right. Well, what is your biggest childhood memory?
Early childhood, or during like when I was in school?
Just when you were in school.
When John F. Kennedy was shot.
So that leads me to another question, but we'll get to that later.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask a few more questions. This which leads me to my next subject on education.
Okay.
Since we were talking about school, how many years of school did you attend?
I attended grade school and high school, basically.
What was grade school like?
Basically, reading, writing, arithmetic. It was just very simple. We only had like 27 kids in my class. We only had less than 500 kids in the whole school. So you pretty much knew everybody, and it was just pretty simple school.
When did grade school start?
First grade.
Okay.
Or kindergarten, and first grade through sixth grade.
And then
seventh grade through seniors.
Okay.
Really, we never really was a junior high.
Okay. So, was everyone in your family able to, was everybody in the family able to attend school, and to what levels?
All of my brothers, or my sister and my two brothers and I, all graduated from Stephen High School. None of us actually went to any other schools after that.
Did they all get jobs afterwards?
Yes. All four of us were in the service for 4 years.
All right. I'll ask you a few questions about that later, but
Okay.
How was schools different from now?
Basically, we couldn't use calculators. We couldn't use computers. Any of that stuff. It was just you read books and took tests.
So,
and a lot of teachers telling you how to do certain things. But we had sports, and we played outside for recess pretty much every day, and at lunchtime we all went to the gym and played, and it was just very simple.
Yeah, so obviously you didn't have computers and stuff, so I'm assuming you were in the library.
No, not at all. Not then. I mean, we weren't even, I don't know, we didn't even have calculators then.
Yeah.
But, none of that stuff was allowed in school. If you'd have got caught with something like that, you would have been cheating.
Yeah. Computers take a
Yeah.
large part of school nowadays, so
Right. And I understand that, but life was just so much different. It's a lot slower pace, you know.
So what were some subjects that you remember studying?
The only subject I enjoyed and studied at all was history.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. My next question was, did you have a favorite subject? Did you?
History. That was the only one I could have cared less about school. It was not anything I enjoyed. I went to it because I had to, and the only subject I enjoyed was history.
Did you? What were some of the biggest subjects in history that they really taught about?
A lot about the Civil War and Revolutionary War, and like World War II. But that was the biggest part.
All right. So now we're gonna start talking about historical events that you remembered. So what was the earliest? Since they talked about World War II, do you remember anything specific, like how it affected your time recently? How did World War II affect your time?
World War II didn't affect my time because when it was over, I was only like 2 years old, or not even 2 years old. So as far as how it affected me, it did not. My dad was not in the war during World War II, but obviously it would have affected his business because he was in the automotive business, and it was hard to get tires and parts and that kind of stuff. But I don't remember any of that.
So, what were the biggest wars you remember?
I was still very young during the Korean War. I was about 8 years old, but obviously Vietnam.
Yeah, you talked.
And that wasn't really a war; that was a police action. But other than that, Vietnam would be the one I would remember the most.
Yeah, you said you went into the military, so you served during the Vietnam War?
Right, from 64 to 68.
So how were you involved?
I was on a ship, and we were based out of Pearl Harbor, and we went 2 cruises to Vietnam, and we were surveying a coast along Vietnam for a possible invasion. We did have small boats on the ship that would take about 6 people, and they would go upriver surveying a coastline and stuff for a possible invasion. I was never in any actual fighting per se, hand-to-hand combat or that kind of stuff.
Did you know anyone that was also in the war?
Friends and stuff that were on my ship, yes.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people that I go to coffee with in the morning. There's a couple, 3 of them. They're all over there. But I don't socialize with anybody that I was actually in the service with over there now, except for one friend that I have back in Ohio.
Did the war ever affect you? Did it change your life?
Not really. No.
Okay, so
mainly I think because I was in a small town. I mean, a lot of the guys who were in the bigger towns and stuff go home and there was a lot of riots and stuff going on, but I did not see any of that.
Was there a lot of controversy back at home with Vietnam War? Was there propaganda? Was there any propaganda?
There was, but I was never around it, or I never was affected by it. I mean, I would see it in the newspapers or on TV where they would have riots in San Francisco or New York or LA, but I think a lot of it was racial riots and a lot of it was war riots. But as far as me personally being involved in any of that stuff, Jack, I was not.
Okay. So we also talked about JFK's assassination, which you said you remember that earlier. Can you just talk about that? What do you remember?
I remember I was having lunch at a little service station in Stephen, Minnesota. I was working at Robertson Lumberyard, and on the way back to work, the radio come across that he had been assassinated. And from then on, for the next week, it was nothing but on TV except JFK's assassination and funeral, of course. And of course, they found the assassination guy, but that was primarily it. I just remember the day and the time.
So, do you remember what about the Cold War? How did that affect the news, TV?
I can remember one time, probably in the 50s, my brother was still home or had come home from the service, and I knew about the Cold War. I knew about Russia and us, but that was primarily what, that the Cold War was between us. And I remember they had a grasshopper infestation up in Stephen, Minnesota, where I grew up. And they were flying airplanes in and out, in and out, in and out. And there was at times that you'd almost were scared that you were being invaded. But and then up around where we lived in northern Minnesota, they were also with the Grand Forks Air Force Base and the Minot Base. They were doing a lot of the Minute missile sites. So that's primarily how I was involved in that part of it. But I know those airplanes scared me when they come in flying in. So you'd wake up at night and you hear all these airplanes and you think you're being invaded.
Another event during the time period was during JFK's the Man on the Moon. How did that? Do you remember seeing that on TV? Because obviously going to space was a huge.
Oh, it was huge. Yes, yeah. I remember. Yes, I remember when that happened. I was watching it on TV when it did happen. Yes, and it was exciting. It was it made you be proud to be an American.
Yeah.
Because we got there before Russia did.
I mean, going to space, astronomy to this day is very interesting, and we learn more and more every year. So.
And it should be. It's just too bad that we don't use our own rockets anymore.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're going to go back and do that.
Would you be excited if we went to Mars or the moon again?
Sure. I think it's all good. It's not, I think anything like that's good.
All right.
Be nice to find another planet with people on it.
Yeah, that would be very, very interesting. So, other than that, we've talked a lot about historical events. Is there any other specific things that happened in your lifetime that you remember?
Well, I remember when your brother was born. I remember when you were born.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those were some.
Yeah. Well, I guess when Nixon said the war was over, that was good.
Okay.
That was good when they brought the foreign prisoners back from Vietnam. That was very good. Same thing with Korea when they brought the prisoners back from Korea, the ones they could get back. Anything like that. And then when the Pueblo, the other thing, when I was in Vietnam, I was there when the Pueblo, the USS Pueblo was captured by the North Koreans. And they took them prisoner and they had them for I think around 80 days. And I remember at that time that so much of the Vietnam War, people that were in it were drafted and didn't want to be soldiers or sailors or anything. But that was the one time during the war in Vietnam that I remember everybody was ready to go to war and back the United States to get these people back. And that was exciting to me because I was always very USA, and I volunteered for the service. I didn't get drafted. And some of these draftees, they just didn't want to be there. But everybody gathered around and was ready to go get these guys back, and that was exciting.
Yeah. How long were you? You said you were. Was it Pearl Harbor? You said you were at.
I was in Pearl Harbor from. See, I went over to Pearl Harbor, and your brother was born in '66.
Yeah.
So I got to Pearl Harbor in '66, and I was there till I got out in '68. but I wasn't there the whole time. We made 2 cruises to Vietnam and back.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to change the subject a little bit. I'm just going to ask you about gender roles. And you talked about how many moms were stay-at-homes. So how has the role of women changed since then in the workplace, and how has the community changed in your lifetime?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's the biggest thing that's happened in this country, is that so many women have had to go to work because of the cost of living and so forth, that has broke the family down. And a lot of kids don't have any discipline. The welfare has created some problems where a lady will have 5, 6 kids, and they don't know who their dads are, and there's no discipline. So that's just a real problem with me. I don't think there's anything wrong with women working, and both people working in a household, but it definitely does take away from lots of things.
Yeah. What did your family expected you did? Were you? Never mind. That's a bad question. I'm gonna change the subject and move on to society and economy.
Okay.
And so, overall in your lifetime, what kind of work did you do? What was your biggest job? What was your first job? Well, we already talked
My
about
first job was working in a creamery in Stephen, Minnesota, wrapping butter at 4:30 in the morning.
And so you said you worked there when you were like 16. Did you
Yep.
work there until the military, or did?
No. I worked there. I only worked there probably for maybe 6 months or so, and then I would. From then I started working at the cafe that Mom and Dad had, and then after I got out of the high school, I went to work at the lumber yard.
Okay.
And then from the lumber yard, I went out to Seattle and worked for my brother for a few months, and then I went into the service in '64, and I got out in '68.
What did you do? What did you do after the service?
Went to work for my brother again in the service station, and then I went with Snap-on Tools, and then from Snap-on Tools we went to Chalet, went up in Montana, and then from there we went to Arizona. Yeah, we went down to Arizona, and then over to where you guys were in Houston.
What observations can you make about the changing American standard of living and economic health?
It's hard for me to understand how they can build all these new homes nowadays and where the folks are getting all the money to buy these homes, or the prices they charge for apartments, and the wages they must be paying these people to afford to do it. It's either the wages are crazy or they're using credit like it shouldn't be, and if they're using credit like it shouldn't be, it's going to create a big problem.
So, as in big problems, and what has been society's greatest challenge since in your lifetime?
Oh, I guess probably how to keep a middle class.
Understandable. How's the community of neighborhoods changed?
I think it just depends on where you live. For instance, if you live in a small town up in northern Minnesota, you're going to socialize with a lot of the people around because they're just very outgoing and friendly. Whereas if you get in a big city like you in Phoenix, there's a lot of people don't know their neighbors, whether they're in apartments or houses, because they just don't come out of them. A gated community like we're in Houston or in Phoenix, everybody in the park knows everybody because it's gated, and we all get around and socialize. But I think a lot of America in some of these housing developments, you might know your neighbor. Other than that, you don't know anyone. And I don't know. A lot of that has to do with when I was growing up, everybody was outside, kids were out playing, Nowadays, they just don't do that as much. And so parents don't meet parents, and kids, but
Yeah.
that's the biggest change, I think.
Well, we'll move on to another subject here.
I probably haven't answered much for you.
No, you have.
Okay.
To politics and government. Besides for the more recent elections, what do you think was the most controversial election, and how did it affect the tone and mood of the society?
Well, I think, excluding Trump, the other two would have been Bush and Dole, or Obama and McCain.
Really? So,
Yep.
what? Not even the 80s or the 60s?
No, they weren't anything like this. If back in the 60s and 70s, granted, it was a Republican got elected, but still Congress and Senate could work somewhat together. The 60s, if a Democrat or a Republican got elected, they didn't fight like cats and dogs like they're doing now. I mean, there was a little bit of, let's get together and get something done. But nowadays, they won't let anything get done. And that's true since Bush got in, and Obama, and now obviously with Trump.
Very interesting. Well, what was your favorite president, and why?
Truman.
And
I don't remember much of him other than after he got out of office. But, the man he never wanted to be president. He didn't want to be vice president. And he had to do one of the toughest things he ever had to do, kill 100,000 people to save 1 million American lives. But he was very honest. He didn't get rich because he became president. He drove home in a 1948 Dodge, didn't have any money. So that's when they started retirement for presidents. But I admire him more than probably any president.
Well, then that leads me to my next question. What was your least favorite president, and why?
Well, let me see. I think J.F. Johnson.
Any particular reason?
Because I think he was a crook, and he made nothing but money off the Vietnam War, he and his family. And I'm not so sure that he didn't have something to do with the assassination of JFK.
Was there a lot of controversy?
Oh, yes.
So, nowadays, I think we have a lot of publicity in promoting presidents. Like, you'll see Trump stickers everywhere. You'll see Obama pictures everywhere. What was promoting presidents' elections like back then in the 60s? And, was there a lot of controversy between neighbors and friends? What was it like?
I think everybody could talk about it. It wasn't like it is now. You could talk with neighbors about it, and there wasn't yelling and screaming. But most of the things you heard about, either one or the advertisements they put up, was through the newspaper. There wasn't all this stuff until later in the 70s and the 80s where it started to go so much on TV because there wasn't TV around. So everything was done in newspapers or magazines, or back in the 50s and 60s and stuff, they would get on trains or on a bus and they'd go around the country.
So, I can't remember my question. I'm trying to think here. What were some political issues that were very important to you?
Obviously, the Vietnam War was important as far as getting it over with. Taxes. When Reagan came in, he lowered taxes and lowered interest rates, which was a great help for our economy. But that's probably the two biggest things that affected me.
And do you think that a lot of people say we have a problem with people not voting enough. Do you think people voted more back then or voted less now? Or more now?
I think more of the population.
Okay.
Oh, I think so. That's. I would think more of the population voted back then than now.
Yeah. Was it really important to vote back then like it is now?
Oh, yes, it was. It's always been important to vote. But yeah, I think more people voted back then.
All right. So, as we were talking about technology, and I think technology definitely has a lot to do with elections now, with just promoting. That's what leads into my next subject, technology. What inventions have changed your life for the better?
Changed my life for the better. Automobile.
How have cars changed since then?
They've gotten a lot more economical. Make it a lot harder for the owner to work on them than they used to be, but a lot safer.
Yeah.
But that's primarily it. A lot faster, Roads have gotten a lot better, so therefore, it makes it better for the cars. But yeah, the vehicles are a lot better now than they were in the 50s and 60s.
What was the price of gas back then?
The cheapest I can remember ever paying was 12 cents a gallon.
Dang.
Guy would come in. I remember one guy come in one time, and he had an old Volkswagen Bug, and it had a 10-gallon tank, and it was $1 to fill it up.
What was it like when computers came out?
It was just, I thought it was something to never take off. I mean, Grandma actually taught at Peterson School of Business in Seattle, Washington, and the computers that they had then were how big, Jack? Size of a 16 by 16 room. And they were just like punch cards. I don't think that's ever going to take off. Remember the first time when we had our service station, we went to a station meeting or a meeting for the company. And they wanted us to all get computers, and I was all against it. But of course, Mom went for it. But I didn't think it'll ever take off. But obviously, it's went nuts. But yeah, that's.
Do you think
all
it's one of
Go
the
ahead.
biggest advancements, or what do you think was the biggest technology advancement?
Electricity.
Electricity. What about electricity has changed?
Well, it's a lot more global and a lot more places that have it, but a lot of this stuff wouldn't work now, or none of this stuff would work now if it wasn't for electricity.
All right. This is our last big subject.
Uh-oh.
Which is popular culture. What do people do for fun then that is different now?
Adults or kids?
Both.
Okay. Kids back then played outside. They played baseball. I mean, if they didn't have a ball, they'd make theirs, or they'd make their own bats, or we threw rocks, or went running and jumping in a river. And even as adults, we played softball. Went together as families and had picnics. Just a lot more camaraderie as far as people getting together and doing things.
How has clothing styles changed?
A lot. I mean, now some of the stuff people wear I don't think should be allowed, but obviously it's changed. How exactly? It seems like every generation has a different style of clothing. So you go from bell bottoms or short sleeves with your cigarettes rolled up in the sleeves and tight bottom pants to jeans hanging halfway down your butt and a ripped t-shirt. As far as dress-up clothes, as far as people dressing up to go to work and stuff, obviously back in those days, if you were a banker or something, you wore a suit and tie all the time. The teachers all wore suit and ties. Nowadays, that's not true.
So,
But
when you were in kid, was there a lot of clothing styles that kids wore?
we didn't know. We wore, I didn't know what the popular jeans were, the clothes were in LA, because we didn't have the communications with them like you do now. So we wore primarily what we thought was popular. We'd go to Grand Forks and find something that we thought was neat, and that's what we wore. I mean, we didn't. The communication wasn't there about what was going on in the rest of the country. So if the popular styles in New York and LA were a certain thing, we might not know about it up north.
Yeah, which is similar to music. So obviously rock was big, but how has music changed over the years, and what was big during your time in school?
Oh, obviously Elvis.
Elvis.
Elvis and the Beatles. Mainly Elvis.
Well, which styles were your favorite?
Jerry Lee Lewis. Rock and roll.
What artist was your favorite?
I always liked Frank Sinatra, but he was before my time. But I always liked him.
Are the artists that you liked back then still the same to this day?
Yeah, I prefer them over what is going on now with music, yes.
All right, so well, you didn't watch much TV as a kid, but did you have any favorite television shows, movies, or productions?
Favorite TV shows. I Love Lucy. What's Lawrence Welkin? What's Ed Sullivan Show? What's the guy, the white guy without Edith was her name. Johnny Archie Bunker. All in the Family. Love that show.
So, what did you ever go see a lot of plays? Like we're going to see movie theaters like with the cars and stuff. Is that common?
We when I grew up, yes. Actually, I met your grandma at an outdoor theater, a drive-in movie.
Yeah, we don't really have drive-in movies anymore.
Yeah, we do. Up in Warren, Minnesota. Still there, the same one I met your grandma at.
Yeah, I went to that one. I remember.
That's
that.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. There's not many of them anymore, but there's still some towns that still have them.
All right. Last couple questions. If you could live your life over, what would you do differently?
I probably would have went to work for a government agency.
Why is that?
For the retirements and the benefits.
Do you know a lot about working at a government agency?
No, I just, it's probably something, I just think now if I had a chance to do it over again, that's what just because of, back when I started working, I didn't think about retirement until later in our married life, but had I to do it over again and could do it over again, I would probably do that just because they have such a good retirement. And with all the benefits, the medical and all that kind of stuff.
Is there any subjects that you would want to learn?
No, other than, I would probably be like, want to be a maintenance person or, something like that. But as far as working in the office or something like that, it's not something I would want to do.
What advice would you give to future generations?
Go to school, get an education,
All right.
and work hard. Show up for work and work hard.
That's all the questions I have for today. Thank you.
Today, am I going to get more questions later on?
No, that's it.
Okay, are you still going to graduate this year?
I am going to graduate this year.
You are. Okay, on the 8th?
Yep.
I still haven't got an invitation. How do you know I can come?
Because I haven't sent them in the mail yet.
Oh, okay. How, has your brother still got 3 cars?